Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Robertson Wesley Kids Church. This is Reverend Karen Bridges with you today. As always, it's so much fun to share some of the Bible stories and teachings about our faith as Christians. Yesterday, I started to tell you about one of the superheroes of the Bible, somebody who was very important to both the Hebrew people, the Israelites, and to Christians alike. So Moses had a lot to do, and so we started telling the story yesterday, and I was giving you the origin story of who Moses was. Now, before we get started, just remember that if you are joining me live, I would love to know who is out there, what your name is, what you're thinking, send me some emoticons, anything like that would be lovely. So yes, Moses, we are going to keep exploring the story of Moses. Do you remember what I told you yesterday? The story of Moses comes from what book of the Bible? What book of the Bible is dedicated to the story of Moses and the Hebrew people, the Israelites? Do you remember? It's the second book in the Bible. Starts with an E, comes from Exodus. Exodus. So like I said, yesterday we told the story of the origin of Moses. So Moses we sent off in a basket down the River Nile. His mom was trying to save him, and then so his sister watched as Moses floated down the river, just like all of the wares or the food or the trade, things that people were trading and living off of were sent down the river. And what happened was Miriam, his sister, saw that the Pharaoh's daughter found Moses and saved Moses and made sure that Moses grew up and became strong. So this is the story of baby Moses. I know it looks like baby Eeyore, but it's baby Moses, I tell you, baby Moses. So, like I said, his life was threatened when he was a baby because the Pharaoh, now do we know what the Pharaoh is? A pharaoh is very specific to Egypt. A pharaoh is the king of Egypt, the ruler of all of Egypt. And Egypt is found in Africa. And I showed you a map the other day. And so I have one here with me as well that we can take a little closer look at to find out more about Moses. So as I said, we left Moses in the care of the Pharaoh's daughter. He grew up, so when he was a teenager, basically, he went out and he saw what was happening to his people. He saw that the Pharaoh was treating the Israelites really, really badly. They were slaves, as I mentioned yesterday. They were slaves. And so they would spend their days toiling over creating bricks. And they would make bricks out of straw and mud, and they would pack them in. It was really heavy, heavy, hard work. Kind of dirty too, really. And sometimes the slave masters, the people that were watching the slaves, would be really, really mean. And they would hit them or hurt them in some way, which was just not nice. And Moses saw this happening, and Moses was not pleased. And Moses was so mad that he did something that he really shouldn't have. He actually ended up, when no one was looking, or so he thought no one was looking, he ended up killing one of those guards that were being really, really mean to the slaves. So he ended up running away. He ran away from Egypt to get away. He was afraid of people finding out what he had done. He also didn't like what was happening to his people, so he ran away. And he tried to help for many a time. So I'm going to show you a map of what happened, where he went. So I'm going to bring you over here so that you're a little bit closer to the map. So this is the map of Egypt. It's a little bit backwards for you, but basically Moses, we know, was in Egypt. So this is part of Africa, and that would be going to the east. And so Moses took a little walk. Well, it wasn't so little. Moses went on a long, long journey that took a while, and he went all the way over to Midian. He went all the way over to Midian. And now I'm going to tell you what happened when he was in Midian. So he walked a long ways, as I told you. And as he was walking, of course, he would get thirsty. And so this one day when he was in Midian, he was sitting beside a well. And as he was sitting beside this well, he was having a drink. And he noticed that the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. And so these 7 girls had come to the well, and they were drawing up water so that they could feed their and water their flock of sheep. When suddenly a rival gang of shepherds came along. This rival gang of shepherds came along and saw the women and chased them off. Well, Moses, you know, Moses was really a good guy at heart. He didn't like it when people were treated badly. He didn't like it when people were bullied. I like Moses. Moses, you know, Moses still doesn't have a superpower yet, but at this moment, Moses had strength. Moses had courage. Moses was not afraid to stand up and help people who needed help. And so that's what he did. As the women, as the girls were chased away, Moses got after the shepherds. And then in the end, it was Moses who drew up the water out of the well. Like, they'd use a bucket and string, and it was a lot of heavy work. There's only one of him, but he managed to feed all of the flock and protect the flock from that gang of shepherds that came by. And so when he went back, the girls went home and told their father what Moses had done and how Moses had really saved the flock and had fed them and everything else. And so their father said, well, you know, we really should invite him over for dinner and thank him for what he did. So Moses, probably after wandering for so long, was really wondering about, you know, probably really hungry, but still did what was right. Did what was right. That's important. Came along and had dinner with them. And over time, he started to work for them. And as it turned out, the father, the priest of Midian, decided that Moses could marry one of his daughters. And so he ended up marrying this beautiful, beautiful girl who became his wife. And her name was, anybody know? Anybody know what her name was? Sephora. Sephora. It starts with a Z. Sephora. All right. So, yeah. So now he's the one who's out tending flock. And so he's spent a long time away. And meantime, back in Egypt, the slaves are still working hard, and they're being tortured. They're not being fed enough. They're probably not getting enough water. They're working themselves so hard that their backs hurt and their fingers are sore and everything's just awful, 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 awful. So then Moses one day had his flock, and he was out in the land of Midian when he came to Mount Horeb. And so he walked up to the top of Mount Horeb. What had happened at this point was that the Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, had actually died, which made the Israelites groan under the slavery. And they really cried out to God, why is this happening to us? So there was Moses tending the flock on the top of Mount Horeb, which is the mountain of God, when suddenly something amazing happened. So a while ago, we made some Play-Doh. So I brought some Play-Doh with me. And we're going to set the scene for what happens next to Moses. So I want you to imagine that this is kind of the trunk of a bush. Make the trunk of a bush. And I've got with me some paper, some colored paper, yellows, reds, pinks, and we're gonna cut out some flames. I'm gonna cut out some flames. And it doesn't need to be perfect, whatever you think your flame would look like. You want to kind of make it so that there's a little end piece so that you can stick it into the trunk of the tree. And I'm using cardstock, so it's a little bit thicker, so it'll stand up. So we are just setting the scene for what's going to happen. This is the moment when Moses is going to get the call from God. Every superhero has a moment where suddenly they realize that they have power they didn't know they had, or they have a moment where they understand what it is they need to do to make the world a better place. And like I said, Moses is one of those people who always wanted to help people, didn't like it when people were treated poorly, did a lot of things to make the world a better place. Still made mistakes because, you know, he is human. And that's just the way it goes, right? So we're making flames right now. Flames in the trunk of a bush for our story. And I'm using Play-Doh as the trunk. Play-Doh as the trunk. So yeah, let's get a few more flames. How are your flames coming? Are they looking pretty good? Looking pretty good. If you've got some blue paper, sometimes the flames turn blue. Oh, that's not gonna work. All right, we're set. The scene is set for the moment when Moses gets some power. All right, so yesterday I was showing you the book. I'm gonna keep reading from the Candle Bible. So remember, she took the Israelite baby back to her palace and named him Moses. Moses grew up. Moses then ran away from Egypt and he looked after sheep in the desert. And so here we are. He is now at the top of a mountain where he saw a bush on fire. See the bush and it's on fire? Bush, it's on fire. Fire. The crazy thing is that the bush wasn't burning up. There was fire there, but it wasn't turning black or disappearing. It was still a bush. Now, if that wasn't amazing enough, wait for this. Suddenly, an angel spoke to Moses from the bush. God says, this is the voice, a voice coming out of the flames, and said, God said, return to Egypt, Moses. Tell Pharaoh to let my people go. The way this story goes, this is the short story. So Moses and his brother Aaron went to Egypt and they told Pharaoh, God says, let my people go. But Pharaoh said, I don't know your God, and I'm not going to let your people go. Here's a little more of the story. So there Moses was on the top of the mountain feeding sheep, when suddenly there was an angel that appeared to him in the bush, just like the story said. And in the bush, the voice said, he looked in the bush first, and Moses heard the voice and was scared and actually amazed, and so thought, I can't look at this bush. It's just too amazing. So he kind of turned away. I must look away from this great sight. And see why the bush is not burning up. When the Lord saw that he had turned to see, God called to him out of the bush. So God actually called to Moses out of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And do you know how he answered? He said, well, here I am. Then he said, this is the voice from the bush, come no closer. I want you to remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And that's when he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. So all the people that came before, this was God. This is God who started everything. And Moses, because it was the voice of God, hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Remember that gods are very powerful, and so this could be a very scary thing. Here you are, just a sheep farmer, you're out tending your sheep when suddenly there's a bush that's on fire, it's not being consumed, and then there's a voice, an angel speaking to you, telling you that I'm God. Can you imagine? Then the Lord said, I have seen what has happened to my people, the people of Hebrew, my chosen people. I've heard their cries, and I know what those slave guards are doing, and I don't like it. I have come down here to free my people from Egypt and to bring them to a land where there is milk and honey, the country of the Canaanites. And I am going to send you, Moses, to Pharaoh to bring my people out of slavery and out of Egypt. Well, you can imagine what Moses thought. He's like, oh my goodness, this is like my stepfather. You want me to go and stand in front of my stepfather who's horrible and mean, and you want me to say, get rid of all of your slaves? You want me to tell him that he shouldn't have any slaves? That's what you're asking me, God? Needless to say, Moses wasn't too thrilled. But God assured him, I'm going to be with you. And this shall be a sign that it is I who sent you. Moses said to him, you know, God, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me, they're going to ask me, well, what is the name of God? Do you know what God's answer was? God's answer was, I am. Tell them that I am sent you. So that's what's happened. Moses, up on the top of the hill, sheep all around, sees this burning thing, has this conversation with God, and is called to now go and free the people. So now he's got to go be the superhero in Egypt. And he feels like he is completely inadequate, that he doesn't have the gifts that God thinks he has. Moses, no, not so much. Did you know that Moses actually stuttered back then? Moses was so afraid of public speaking, and now he not only had to go back, but he had to confront the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, and say, you got to let go of all your slaves. Set them free. Well, as many of you know, this is not an easy thing to do. So there was a little bit of help. God gave Moses some help. Not only gave him his brother Aaron and Miriam. They went, and Aaron was luckily a pretty good speaker, so Aaron helped Moses in that moment. But you know as well as I do that pharaohs and kings can be very stubborn. They don't like to lose the things that they have. It'd be kind of like you giving up all of your toys. Can you imagine somebody coming in and saying, you must give away all of the toys that you have? Well, want to know what happens next? It's pretty awesome. So God made 10 terrible things happen to the Egyptians, not to the Israelites, but to the Egyptians. So not Moses' people, but the people in charge. So God made terrible things happen in Egypt. Frogs hopped everywhere. Can you imagine being surrounded by frogs? Then gnats nipped everyone. These are like little bugs coming out. Flies buzzed everywhere. Cows got sick and died, and the river turned as red as blood. So the water was no longer blue, it became red. People got spots all over their skin. Big hailstones fell from the sky. Grasshoppers gobbled the leaves. It was dark everywhere. And even the oldest Egyptian children died. It took all of that. So we started slow. God first sent, like I said, the frogs, all hopping around. Can you imagine all the slimy things? I mean, we might enjoy it, but if there's millions and millions of them all around you, it'd be a little weird. I think I'd freak out a little bit. And then God sent insects and stuff. So I thought it'd be fun today to make a kazoo. This was one of my favorite instruments as a kid. And you can make it fairly simply with a piece of paper and wax paper and an elastic. I've cheated a little bit. I found a toilet paper tube, something you look through. I have a piece of wax paper, which I'm sure your parents can find for you. And you know it makes that crinkly sound, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put the wax paper over top of our tube. And we're gonna wrap it around just like that. And then we're gonna use an elastic to tighten it really tight. It might be as tight as I can get it. So wrap it around really tightly. And then what you can do is make noises. So listen to what happens to my voice. Hello out there. Woo. Do you hear the vibrations? want you to imagine there's a whole bunch of flies, and you're going to make the sound of the flies. So much fun, right? So you can make your own instrument. Now you've got a kazoo. And as long as you make sounds like you're singing, you can't just breathe into it. You need to make a sound, like when you're talking, So you can sing songs that way. Let's pick a song you know. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life's but a dream. Isn't that fun? Ha! All right, so that's the sound of flies. So you can imagine if there are thousands and thousands of flies all around you, what that would sound like. It would be very, very loud and very, very buggy and very, very frustrating and annoying. But that wasn't enough to make Pharaoh let the people go. The Pharaoh really, really didn't want to do it. So God just kept making it worse and worse and worse. Disaster after disaster after disaster, to the point where the Egyptian people also got little sores all over their skin, itchy, and oh, it was awful and gross. Like I said, the water was no longer blue, it turned red like it was blood. There was a huge thunderstorm with big hailstones that did all sorts of damage. And it wasn't until after all of that Pharaoh finally said, go. So Moses led the slaves, the Hebrew people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. By day, a pillar of cloud went in front of them, and that's how Moses knew where to go. So there was a pillar of a cloud that went before them. And at night, there was a pillar of fire. Because obviously at night, you're not going to see a cloud. You're going to see fire because it's light. But in the daytime, when it's really light out, you're not going to see the fire as easily as you're going to see a cloud. So the cloud and the fire led the people to where they needed to go. And that's when we get the great battle, which I will share with you tomorrow. Like I said, Moses' story is very, very long and very intricate. But basically, today what we heard is he was given a special task to do from God. He had to protect the people. And isn't that what superheroes do? Superheroes protect people. They help them in their times of need. And so we heard the origin story on Monday about what happened for Moses. And now Moses is on his own. He's grown up. He's got a wife. And then he hears the voice of God, and God tells him what he needs to do. And Moses doesn't think he's capable of doing it. Like many of us, he thinks he's pretty ordinary and there's nothing special about him. But the reality is God thinks every single one of us is special. And God has a special task for each of us to do. And sometimes there's many in our lifetime. Sometimes there's one big one. They're all important and they're all essential to what happens. So I hope that I'm going to teach you a little chant today. This is going to be our Moses chant. So think of yourselves as if you were in an arena sports team. So Moses, Moses, he's our man. If he can't do it, no one can. Can you say that with me? Moses, Moses, he's our man. If he can't do it, no one can. Let's use our kazoos. Moses, Moses, he's our man. If he can't do it, no one can. Pretty good, hey? We're just going to have fun with that. So today I thought we would do a prayer and think about people in our own world who we need to stand up for. Are there people in our world right now that we need to stand up for, just like Moses did, for the people who are being treated so poorly by the Pharaoh? And the Pharaoh is a specific name for a king that only exists in Egypt. I don't know if you knew that, but pharaohs only exist in Egypt, which is in Africa. So yeah, who are people that we need to pray for in this world? People who are not being treated fairly. We can think about how sometimes we treat people who have different colored skin than us. Sometimes we don't treat them with respect. Sometimes they're hurt when they shouldn't be because we assume that they are a certain way. Maybe we need to pray for for people who are refugees, people who have been kicked out of their country. If you think about it, the Israelites in Egypt, they were exiled. They had to leave their land to go somewhere else because of how mean the Pharaoh was. So it wasn't that the Pharaoh made them free and they could stay and live in Egypt. The Pharaoh set them free and told them to get out, go away. So maybe we should pray for people who are not treated nicely, people who have been hurt by people in power. Sometimes this happens at home and in our schools. We hope it doesn't, and we hope that everyone will treat each other with respect and love. So let's ask God in a prayer to help us find the strength to stand up when people are being bullied, and to stand up when things aren't right. Let's pray together. Loving God, we ask for strength today. Give us the power and the courage to tell people to stop when they are hurting other people. Help us to stand up for people who are not being treated well. We want the bullies of the world to stop. We want people to be treated nicely. We want to be kind to each other. And we know that with your help, we can do that and we can change the world. And help us, God, hear your voice, knowing that you have a special task for each of us to do. And we may not know what it is yet, but we will at some point. Thank you for believing in us and loving us for who we are. And help us to remember that together we can change the world. It doesn't take just one person. It takes all of us. Just like the ants and bugs' life with the grasshopper. In your name we pray. Amen. So that's part 2 of the Moses story. So we know the origin, where Moses came from. Now we know how Moses got the power. It was God that gave Moses the power, and it happened in the burning bush. So you can keep creating all of these things, and then remember that God sent not 1, not 2, but 10 horrible things so that Pharaoh would let the people go. And so think of the flies. The flies buzzing around. Remember our chant? Moses, Moses, he's our man. If he can do it, none can. I want you to sing and have fun today, and go knowing that you are not alone, that God loves you. God is always with you. Go in peace. Stand up against injustice. Stand up for what is right. That is our call today, and we will hear more of Moses' story tomorrow at 11 o'clock. So I hope you join me then. Okay, thanks. Bye, everyone.